The lamplight cast a warm, contained circle around Milo's armchair, illuminating the pages of his worn paperback. Outside, the city hummed a distant, soporific tune, a sound he'd long since learned to filter into the background of his quiet existence. He savored the stillness of his high-rise apartment, a sanctuary high above the ceaseless churn of the streets below. The only movement was the turning of a page, the only sound, the soft rustle of paper. He was deep into the protagonist's latest existential crisis, a familiar comfort in its predictable melodrama. Then came the tap. It was soft, no louder than a raindrop, yet it resonated through the quiet air like a gong. Milo's gaze snapped from the printed words to the glass of his balcony door. His heart gave a startled thump against his ribs. He lived on the 17th floor. No one tapped on his balcony door. Ever. His breath hitched. Standing on the narrow strip of concrete, bathed in the spill of light from Milo's living room, was Jake, his neighbor from across the hall. The large, silent man who always seemed to be heading out early, returning late, a phantom presence he rarely saw and never spoke to beyond a shared, awkward nod in the elevator. Jake was dressed in a dark hoodie, the hood pulled down, his dark hair falling across his forehead. His hands were tucked into his pockets, but one had clearly just withdrawn to make that impossible, improbable sound. Jake stood utterly still, his eyes, dark and unreadable from this distance, fixed on Milo. He didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't offer any explanation for his impossible appearance. He just stood there, a silent, imposing figure against the night sky. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted a hand and pointed. Not at Milo, but past him, into the apartment. An unspoken request, clear as day. He wanted in. A shiver, entirely separate from the evening chill, traced its way down Milo's spine. His mind scrambled, trying to make sense of the scene. How had he gotten onto Milo's balcony? Had he scaled the building? Climbed from his own? The logistics seemed insane, impossible, yet there he was. A fleeting thought of danger, of invasion flickered, quickly replaced by a deeper, stranger current of curiosity. Jake didn't look threatening, just present, expectant. Milo pushed himself out of the armchair, the sudden movement feeling clumsy and loud in the silence. His paperback slipped from his lap, landing with a soft thud on the rug. He walked towards the balcony door, each step measured, feeling an odd pull, a sense of inevitability. He paused at the glass, his reflection superimposed over Jake's still form. He could see the faint condensation of his own breath on the cool surface. Jake's eyes, even closer now, seemed to hold a vast, quiet ocean of something Milo couldn't decipher. With a slow, deliberate motion, Milo reached for the latch. It clicked, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden intensity of the moment. He slid the glass door open a crack, a sliver of cool night air immediately invading the warmth of his apartment. The scent of ozone and something faintly metallic, like rain on concrete, drifted in. Jake stepped forward, not rushing, not hesitating, but moving with a quiet certainty that defied the strangeness of the situation. He slid past the door, his large frame filling the opening for a moment, before he was fully inside. Milo instinctively took a step back, giving him space, his heart still thrumming. The moment Jake was through, he stopped. He didn't close the door behind him. Milo felt a faint pressure in the air, a sense of suspended animation. Jake just stood there, his gaze slowly sweeping across Milo's living room. From the overflowing bookshelf, to the mismatched throw pillows on the sofa, to the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. His eyes lingered on the fallen paperback, then returned to Milo, still silent. His expression was unreadable, a blend of observation and something else, something almost vulnerable. Milo found his voice, a little breathy, a little uneven. "Jake? How did you get out there?" Jake didn't answer immediately. He took another slow, deliberate breath, his chest expanding under the dark fabric of his hoodie. His gaze finally settled on Milo's face, intense and unwavering. He seemed to be searching for something there, something he perhaps couldn't articulate. A strange, almost raw confusion flickered in his dark eyes, swiftly masked by his usual stoicism. The quiet between them stretched, thick with unspoken questions and an unexpected, bewildering intimacy. The tapping, the impossible arrival, the silent entry, it all coalesced into a potent, unsettling mystery. And Milo, despite his apprehension, felt an undeniable pull towards finding out more. The impossible visit wasn't an anomaly. 2 nights later, a faint tapping against the glass startled Milo from the edge of sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed 1:47 a.m. His heart began its now familiar quickening. Pushing back the duvet, he padded to the balcony door. Jake was there, a dark silhouette against the city's luminous haze, his features inscrutable in the dim light. Without a spoken word, Milo unlatched the door. Jake slid in, his movements fluid and noiseless, as if he were merely a part of the nocturnal air. He sought nothing, offered no explanation. He simply crossed to the couch and settled, his gaze immediately fixing on Milo. Still half asleep and utterly bemused, Milo found himself drawn to his desk. He picked up a half-finished sketch, charcoal dust smudging his fingertips. Jake watched, utterly still. The only sounds were the soft scrape of charcoal on paper and the distant hum of the sleeping metropolis. This evolved into their strange custom. Every few nights, a late-hour summons, a quiet ingress, a shared, wordless space. Milo never anticipated Jake's arrival. Sometimes Tuesday, sometimes Friday. The unpredictability was a low thrum beneath his skin, an unsettling anticipation. He attempted to adhere to his routine, tried to ignore the silent presence on his couch, but it proved futile. He'd be immersed in a book, the words blurring as he grew acutely aware of Jake's steady observation. He'd be sketching, lost in the delicate interplay of light and shadow, only to feel the weight of Jake's scrutiny, a palpable pressure that made his hand falter. Jake remained mute. No greeting, no sigh, no whisper. His silence was absolute, profound. It permeated the room, thick and heavy, pressing down on Milo until he felt he might burst from the torrent of unspoken questions churning inside him. Why are you here? How do you get here? What do you want? The words formed on his tongue, a desperate plea for clarity, but they always died there, choked by the sheer unlikeliness of the situation and the unwavering quietude of his guest. One evening, Milo was meticulously shading the fine lines of a gargoyle's wing. He felt particular pride in how the light caught the stone, the subtle textures he'd managed to convey. He sensed Jake shift on the couch, a soft rustle of fabric. When Milo looked up, Jake wasn't observing his face, nor even the drawing itself. His eyes were fixed intently on Milo's hands. The desk lamp illuminated his fingers, stained with charcoal and graphite, moving with practiced precision. Jake's gaze felt almost like a physical touch, a warmth on his skin. It was an intense, unwavering stare, not critical, but studying, observing, as if Milo's hands held some profound secret, a key to an unknown lock. Milo felt a flush creep up his neck. He tried to continue his work, but the self-consciousness was overwhelming. His movements stiffened, became hesitant. He sought to break the spell. "It's just a gargoyle," he mumbled, pushing the drawing slightly towards Jake, who remained motionless. Jake's eyes flickered to the paper for a moment, then immediately returned to Milo's hands. The intensity of that stare was unnerving, unsettling, yet strangely captivating. There was no judgment in it, no malice, just an unyielding focus that made Milo feel utterly exposed. The air in the apartment crackled with an unspoken tension, an electric current of curiosity and apprehension. Milo found himself wondering what Jake perceived, what he was searching for in the subtle flex of tendons, the slight tremor of concentration. Was it the creative impulse? The very act of creation? Or something else entirely, something Milo couldn't even begin to fathom? He cleared his throat, the sound ridiculously loud in the silence. You never say anything," Milo managed, his voice barely a whisper. He looked directly at Jake, trying to penetrate the veil of his enigmatic expression. Jake's eyes, usually dark and still, seemed to deepen for a fraction of a second. There was a subtle shift in his posture, a slight lean forward, but no sound, no reply. Just that silent, penetrating gaze that burrowed into Milo, leaving him with more questions than answers, and an inexplicable ache in his chest. The silence stretched, vast and profound, a testament to the growing, bewildering connection between them. A breath away. The nights blurred into a recurring dreamscape, a silent tableau starring Jake in the ever-present, unwavering intensity of his gaze. Milo had stopped questioning the how and the why of Jake's appearance on his balcony. It simply was. The initial shock had given way to a strange, almost domestic rhythm. He'd hear the soft scrape of shoes, the gentle creak of the sliding door, and then the familiar presence would settle into the periphery of his vision. Tonight, however, felt different. Milo was engrossed in sketching a series of intricate geometric patterns, the charcoal gritty against the rough paper, when he felt it. A shift in the air, a subtle displacement of warmth beside him. He didn't look up immediately, his breath catching in his throat. He just kept his hand moving, the lines becoming a little less steady, a little more jagged. When he finally dared to glance, he found Jake, not in his usual armchair across the room, nor perched on the edge of the coffee table. Jake was on the couch, right beside him. The space between them was a chasm of unspoken words, yet physically it was almost nothing. Milo could feel the radiating heat from Jake's body, a quiet hum against the cool night air. His heart, usually a steady drum, began to tap out a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He gripped the charcoal stick tighter, his knuckles whitening. He tried to ignore it, to immerse himself in the intricate dance of lines and angles on the page. But the sketch became a meaningless blur. His peripheral vision was a kaleidoscope of Jake's dark sleeve, the subtle curve of his knee, the strong, still hand resting on his thigh, a mere inch from Milo's own. Then it happened. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Jake shifted, adjusting his posture, and his arm, solid and warm, brushed against Milo's. It was a fleeting contact, a whisper of fabric against skin, but it sent a jolt through Milo that echoed down to his toes. He froze, the charcoal poised midair. He kept his gaze fixed on the paper, pretending to be utterly absorbed in his drawing. His breath hitched, a small, involuntary gasp he quickly swallowed. He could feel the blood rushing to his ears, a roaring tide that drowned out the quiet hum of the refrigerator. His mind, usually a bustling marketplace of thoughts, was suddenly empty, save for the singular, overwhelming awareness of Jake's proximity. "Busy tonight?" Milo managed to ask, the words a little rough, a little too loud in the profound silence. He didn't expect an answer, and he didn't get one. The silence, however, felt heavier now, charged with the unspoken tension between them. He reached for a book he'd left on the side table, a thick volume of ancient maps and cartography. He flipped it open, feigning an interest he didn't possess, his eyes scanning the intricate lines of long-forgotten coastlines and mythical beasts. He hoped his face didn't betray the frantic flutter in his chest, the way his skin prickled where Jake's arm had touched his. Every nerve ending was alive, attuned to the presence beside him. He could almost feel Jake's breath, a warm phantom caress against his cheek, though he knew Jake was still and silent. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. It was a strange kind of intimacy, this shared silence, this close proximity, all under the scrutinizing, unyielding weight of Jake's gaze. He turned a page, the rustle of paper a deafening sound. He could feel Jake's eyes on him, not just on his hands now, but on his face, his hairline, the subtle tremor in his fingers. It was an invasion, yet Milo felt no urge to retreat. Instead, a strange, burgeoning curiosity began to bloom in his chest, pushing past the discomfort and the rising heat. What was Jake looking for? What did he see? Milo cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. "Interesting stuff," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely at the ancient map. He risked another glance at Jake. The other man was still, his expression unreadable, his eyes a dark, bottomless pool that seemed to absorb all light. But this time, the gaze wasn't solely fixed on his hands. It held a broader, more encompassing intensity, taking in all of Milo. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Milo's heart hammered a frantic drum against his ribs. He felt like he was balanced on a precipice, a breath away from something momentous, something that would irrevocably alter the landscape of his quiet, solitary life. He just didn't know what. The quiet ritual of Jake's nightly visits had begun to evolve. After the startling intimacy of him sitting beside Milo on the couch, the air in the small apartment hummed with a different kind of energy, a suppressed current that pulsed between them. Now there was an added layer to the enigma. Jake began to bring things. The first was a perfect, unblemished red apple. Milo had been hunched over his sketchbook, charcoal dust smudging the pads of his fingers, when he heard the familiar soft thud of Jake dropping onto the balcony. A moment later, a shadow fell across his periphery, and a low thrum vibrated in his chest. Jake stood by the coffee table, a silhouette against the dim light from the window, and gently placed the apple beside Milo's half-empty mug. The fruit seemed to glow, a stark crimson against the muted tones of the room. Jake said nothing, as always, but his gaze, when Milo finally looked up, was fixed and heavy, a silent offering in itself. Milo watched him leave, the apple remaining, a small, vibrant mystery. He didn't need it that night, or the next. It sat on the table, a testament to Jake's strange thoughtfulness, a question mark Milo couldn't decipher. A few nights later, it was a stone. Not just any stone, but one perfectly smooth and oval, the kind worn by endless tumbling in a riverbed. Its surface was a mottled gray, cool to the touch, and it fit snugly in Milo's palm when he picked it up after Jake had vanished into the night. Milo remembered a childhood fascination with such stones, how they held the memory of water and time. He turned it over and over, the weight of it grounding him, yet simultaneously unsettling. What did Jake intend with these tokens? Was he trying to communicate something that words couldn't express? Was this a glimpse into a hidden part of Jake's inner world, a world Milo had only ever observed from a distance? The quiet offerings continued, each one a small, tangible fragment of Jake's presence. One evening, Milo found a small, wilting flower on the table. Its petals, once a vibrant yellow, now drooped, tinged with brown at the edges. It was a pathetic sight, yet it carried a surprising poignancy. Milo picked it up, cradling its fragile stem. He felt a pang of something akin to pity, then quickly dismissed it. Pity for Jake? It seemed absurd, given Jake's self-contained demeanor. But the flower, so ephemeral and fading, suggested a vulnerability Milo hadn't yet seen in him. He often wondered if Jake was lonely. These small gifts, left without explanation, felt like a silent plea for connection. Or perhaps just a reaching out, clumsy and wordless. Milo considered asking him directly, "Are you all right, Jake? Do you need something?" But the words always died in his throat. Jake never asked for anything in return. He simply came, brought his silent offering, and watched. The watching was perhaps the most unnerving aspect. Jake would settle into the armchair opposite Milo, or sometimes, as he had that first night, perch on the edge of the couch, a breath away. His eyes, dark and fathomless, would follow Milo's every movement. The flick of his wrist as he sketched, the subtle shift of his weight, the unconscious furrow of his brow when he concentrated. There was a softness in Jake's gaze then, a faraway look that hinted at emotions Milo couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't the intense, almost challenging stare from the early days. This was something different, something tender and yearning, yet still utterly unreadable. Milo found himself increasingly distracted during these visits. His charcoal strokes grew hesitant, his focus on the drawing shattered by the awareness of Jake's silent scrutiny. The air thickened with unspoken questions, with the weight of these small, mysterious gifts. He tried to project an air of nonchalance, to continue his routine as if nothing had changed. But inside, a quiet storm was brewing. Each apple, each stone, each wilting flower chipped away at his carefully constructed emotional barriers, leaving him exposed to a burgeoning curiosity that was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Jake was becoming less of an enigmatic nocturnal visitor and more of an insistent, silent presence, weaving himself into the fabric of Milo's solitary life, one quiet offering at a time. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet Milo knew, with a certainty that hummed in his bones, that nothing would ever be quite the same. Comfort and silence. The cool evening air, once a blanket of solitary peace, now felt incomplete without the subtle shift of shadow at his glass door. Milo, accustomed to the rhythmic scratch of charcoal on paper being his only nightly companion, found himself increasingly attuned to the world beyond his studio. A rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the faint hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. Each sound was filtered through a new lens, a subconscious ear cocked for the particular, almost imperceptible tap that announced Jake's arrival. It had been weeks since the first apple, the smooth stone, the wilting flower. The offerings, once baffling, now felt like a strange language he was slowly learning to decipher. He hadn't understood the initial pull, the magnetic force that kept Jake appearing, but he was starting to understand the magnetic force that kept him looking out. The initial strangeness had softened, transmuted into something akin to comfort. A peculiar, unsettling comfort, perhaps, but comfort nonetheless. He would often find himself pausing mid-stroke, his gaze drifting from his canvas to the dark, reflective surface of the glass. The silence he shared with Jake was not the expansive, echoing quiet of true solitude. That kind of silence, the one he had cultivated for years, was a vast, empty space where his thoughts could roam unchecked. The silence with Jake was different. It was dense, weighted with unspoken words and shared presence. It was a silence that held a peculiar warmth, like a hand held just above his own, not quite touching, but undeniably there. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Milo found himself lingering over dinner, an unfamiliar impatience pricking at him. He cleaned his brushes with a meticulousness that bordered on distraction, his eyes darting towards the door every few minutes. When the soft tap finally came, it was less a surprise and more a confirmation of a nascent expectation. A faint smile touched his lips, fleeting and almost imperceptible. A reaction that would have astounded him just a month prior. Jake stood there, framed by the dim light of the porch, a small, dark object clutched in his hand. Tonight it was a feather, iridescent in the faint glow, its delicate barbs shimmering with a faint blue. He held it out, his eyes dark and fathomless, fixed on Milo's face. There was a softness in them now, a vulnerability that had not been present in their earlier encounters. It was a yearning, almost. Milo opened the door, not wide, but enough for the feather to be presented and accepted. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a surprising jolt through Milo. Jake's skin was cool, his touch hesitant. Milo took the feather, turning it over in his palm. It was impossibly light, a whisper of a thing. "Thank you," Milo murmured, the words feeling clumsy, unused to speaking in Jake's presence. Jake simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. He didn't speak, didn't move to step inside, but his presence filled the doorway, a solid, comforting anchor in the shifting currents of Milo's internal landscape. Milo found himself wanting to reach out, to touch Jake's arm, to break the invisible barrier that still existed between them. The urge was strong, surprising in its intensity. They stood like that for a long moment, the shared silence a living thing breathing between them. It was a conversation without words, a deepening understanding that transcended language. Milo could feel Jake's gaze, not intrusive, but seeking, almost pleading. What was he seeking? What was he silently asking for? Eventually, Jake shifted, a subtle movement that signaled his departure. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, of farewell. Then he turned, melting back into the shadows of the night. Milo closed the door, the feather still clutched in his hand. He returned to his studio, but the canvas no longer held the same allure. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene. Jake's softened gaze, the brush of their fingers, the profound weight of their shared silence. He looked down at the feather, a delicate symbol of something new and unidentifiable unfolding in his life. He was no longer just waiting for Jake. He was looking forward to him. The solitary artist was finding comfort in a different kind of quiet, one that included the enigmatic presence of his silent visitor. And the realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The storm and the touch. The wind, a banshee wail, clawed at the windows, shaking the glass in its frames. Rain lashed against the panes, blurring the world outside into a streaky watercolor of gray and black. Milo sat in his armchair, a sketchbook open on his lap, though his hand remained still. The dramatic symphony of the storm resonated with a new kind of anticipation humming within him, a counterpoint to the usual quiet of his evenings. He wasn't just weathering the storm. He was waiting for something more. Then, a soft, distinct tap at the glass door, barely audible over the gale. But Milo heard it. He always did. He rose, a strange warmth unfurling in his chest, and unlatched the door. Jake stepped in, a shadow against the churning night, rain glistening on his hair and the shoulders of his dark jacket. He carried no offering tonight, just the raw scent of rain and damp earth. Milo closed the door, the storm's roar immediately muffled, leaving only the drumming of rain and the sudden intimacy of their shared space. Jake didn't speak, as was his custom. He simply looked at Milo, his eyes, usually so intense, holding a flicker of something new. A shared awareness of the wildness outside, perhaps, or the quietude within. He moved to the couch, not to his usual spot at the far end, but sat down surprisingly close to Milo's vacated armchair, leaving only a sliver of cushion between them. Milo's breath hitched, a faint tremor running through him. The proximity was startling, a physical manifestation of the invisible threads that had been weaving between them for weeks. He settled back into his armchair, acutely aware of Jake's presence, the subtle shift of fabric as he moved, the faint rise and fall of his chest. The air in the room thickened, charged not with words, but with an unspoken current that crackled between them. Milo found himself unable to look away, his gaze drawn to Jake's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the slight curve of his lips in repose. He wondered what Jake saw when he looked at him, what silent narratives played out behind those dark eyes. The storm outside seemed to intensify, a fitting backdrop to the escalating tension within the small apartment. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening clap of thunder that rattled the very foundations of the building. Milo jumped, a startled gasp escaping him, his hand flying to his chest. The jolt was visceral, a raw, primal reaction to the sudden, overwhelming noise. Jake, too, flinched, a slight tremor passing through him. Then, in a movement so swift and unexpected it almost seemed to defy the quiet grace of his usual demeanor, he reached out. His hand, warm and surprisingly large, settled gently on Milo's forearm. It wasn't a grab or a squeeze, but a tender anchor, a quiet reassurance against the lingering shock. Milo froze, every nerve ending in his arm suddenly alight with the sensation of Jake's touch. The warmth seeped through his sleeve, a comforting heat that spread through his veins, chasing away the last vestiges of the thunder's fright. He didn't pull away. He couldn't. His eyes, wide with surprise, met Jake's. And then it happened. A subtle curve at the corner of Jake's mouth, a faint crinkle at the outer edge of his eye. A small, shy smile. It was fleeting, barely there, but it was unmistakably a smile. It was the first time Milo had ever seen one from him, a crack in the stoic facade, revealing a glimpse of something vulnerable and profoundly gentle. The smile transformed his face, softening the sharp angles, infusing his eyes with a warmth that mirrored the touch on Milo's arm. Milo felt a strange melting sensation in his chest, a release of breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The apprehension that had always lingered around Jake, a faint echo of the unknown, began to dissolve, replaced by a nascent feeling of profound security. The storm still raged outside, but inside, in the quiet glow of the lamplight, with Jake's hand warm on his arm and that small, shy smile gracing his lips, Milo felt an unexpected calm settle over him. He found himself returning the gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had just deepened, irrevocably. Soft melodies and lingering thoughts. The storm's ferocity had dwindled to a hushed patter against the pane, a soft counterpoint to the tempest that had raged. Jake, rather than making a move to depart as the squall subsided, remained a comfortable fixture on the armchair's edge. The expanse between them, once a silent declaration of boundaries, now pulsed with an almost magnetic intimacy. Milo, still replaying the fleeting contact, the gentle smile, felt his breathing steady, a tendril of warmth unfurling from his core. Minutes bled into an hour. Jake shifted, a faint sigh exhaling from him, and then a sound so subtle, Milo barely registered it. A low, wordless melody began. It was a simple, cyclical tune, seemingly resonating from some deep, unplumbed well within him. Not a performance, but a private, almost involuntary emanation, openly shared. The melody permeated the room, not shattering the quietude, but softening its stark edges, rendering it companionable. It felt like a whispered confidence, a fragile offering Milo instinctively cherished. He found his eyelids drifting shut, letting the sound wash over him, a gentle current in the storm's wake. The air, still damp and cool, no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it thrummed with the faint resonance of Jake's presence, a presence unexpectedly blossoming into a new motif in Milo's own life. When Jake finally rose to leave, the soft sound attenuated, leaving behind a silence that, paradoxically, felt richer, imbued with a lingering warmth. The following evening, Jake reappeared, a small, dark obsidian stone nestled in his palm. He placed the cool, polished surface, catching the lamplight, onto Milo's coffee table before settling once more into the armchair. This time, the soft vocalization began sooner, a different, slightly melancholic yet profoundly soothing refrain. Milo observed him, a quiet fascination taking root. Jake's eyes, typically so guarded, now held a nascent tenderness, a vulnerability Milo hadn't dared to imagine. He didn't just stay for the customary half hour. He He remained until the sky outside deepened to an inky cobalt, the first stars puncturing the receding cloud cover. After Jake's departure, the obsidian stone felt warm beneath Milo's fingertips. He found himself tracing its smooth contours, his mind replaying the soft, wordless compositions. The gentle hum had begun to permeate his thoughts, a recurring echo. He'd caught himself, mid-activity, humming a fragment of one of Jake's tunes. It was a disquieting, yet not unwelcome intrusion. The enigma surrounding Jake, initially a hazy, intriguing, distant prospect, now sharpened into a series of pointed inquiries. Where did he go when he left? What filled his days? Did he hum these melodies in the solitude of his own apartment? What thoughts occupied him? Milo, long accustomed to a secluded inner world, found himself, for the first time in years, genuinely curious about another person's internal landscape. It was a strange, almost unsettling sensation, akin to a long dormant seed stirring to life. He envisioned Jake moving through his day, a silent observer in his own sphere, perhaps humming softly as he performed his routines. The image was vivid, persistent. He pictured Jake's hands, those strong, capable fingers that had briefly, so gently, touched his own, now engaged in some unknown endeavor. Milo wondered if Jake had a job, friends, family. He scrutinized the small details he had gleaned, the faded denim of his jeans, the quiet intensity in his gaze, the hesitant approach to the balcony door. Each detail, once merely a facet of Jake's enigmatic aura, now became a clue, a piece of a puzzle Milo felt compelled to assemble. The soft vocalizations remained a constant during Jake's visits, a subtle, almost imperceptible thread weaving through their shared stillness. Milo had begun to anticipate it, a gentle expectation settling in his chest as dusk gathered. Sometimes, Jake would lean back, eyes closed, lost in the melody he was conjuring. Milo would watch him, a profound sense of calm enveloping him. The intimacy wasn't conveyed through words, but through the shared space, the shared sound, the shared quiet understanding that was blossoming between them, a delicate, precious thing. He knew, with a certainty that resonated as softly as Jake's tunes, that something fundamental within him was shifting, irrevocably and wonderfully. Shared canvas, shared breath. The sky, still bruised from the recent storm, bled into a magnificent display of oranges and purples as the sun dipped below the horizon. Milo, perched on his stool by the wide studio window, found himself lost in the fervor of creation, his brush dancing across the canvas. He was attempting to capture the raw, untamed beauty of the evening, mixing cadmium red with a touch of alizarin crimson, striving for a shade that vibrated with the same intense energy he felt stirring within him. Each stroke was a deliberate act, a wrestling match with the ephemeral nature of light. The smell of turpentine mingled with the faint, earthy scent of damp air filtering through the slightly ajar window. A subtle shift in the air, a warmth at his back, alerted him to Jake's presence before he saw him. Milo didn't startle, a testament to how accustomed he had become to these silent arrivals. Jake stood close, his breathing soft against the nape of Milo's neck, a new intimacy that brought a strange hum to Milo's bones. Milo could feel the faint vibration of Jake's chest against his shoulder blade, the solid, comforting weight of another human being. It wasn't the fleeting touch of accidental proximity. This was a deliberate closeness, a shared space. Milo paused, his brush hovering over the canvas, but he didn't turn. He found he didn't need to. He could feel Jake's gaze tracing the lines of his painting, a silent communion of vision. The sunset, vibrant and alive, seemed to pulse with a new meaning under their combined attention. Then Jake leaned in further, his head almost brushing Milo's. Milo felt a feather-light touch on his hair, a brush that could have been accidental or deliberate, he couldn't tell. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of pine and something else, something warm and indefinable, enveloped him. Jake's breath ghosted over his ear, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with cold. It was a current of anticipation, a frisson of something new and exhilarating. A long, lean finger extended past Milo's shoulder, pausing above a particularly rich swirl of deep orange that Milo had just laid down. It was a color that burned with an inner fire, a vivid representation of the dying sun's last gasp. Jake's finger didn't touch the wet paint, but hovered, a silent declaration of appreciation. Then a sound, so soft it was almost a breath, escaped Jake's lips. It was a sigh, long and contented, imbued with a quiet happiness that resonated deep within Milo. It was the most profound sound Milo had heard from Jake in weeks. Not a hum, not a murmur, but a genuine expression of pleasure. The sound vibrated in the air between them, a delicate bridge forged from shared observation and unspoken understanding. Milo's hand, still holding the brush, trembled slightly. The fear, the initial apprehension that had always accompanied Jake's unpredictable appearances, had completely dissipated. In its place, a potent, almost irresistible curiosity bloomed. He wanted to know what made Jake sigh like that. What hues spoke to his quiet soul? What other emotions lay beneath that composed exterior? The distance between them, once an unbreachable chasm, now felt like a permeable membrane, inviting exploration. He slowly turned his head, just enough to catch Jake's profile. The gentle curve of his jaw, the slight parting of his lips in that lingering sigh, the way his dark eyes were still fixed on the canvas, on that particular shade of orange. There was an innocence to the expression, a simple, unadulterated joy that disarmed Milo completely. Milo realized, with a jolt that went through him like a sudden electrical current, that he wasn't just observing Jake anymore. He was feeling him, sensing the shift in his own internal landscape, the slow, insistent pull towards this enigmatic man. The sunset, once a solitary pursuit, had become a shared canvas, illuminated not just by the fading light outside, but by the quiet, expanding light within him. He felt an urge, primal and undeniable, to reach out, to bridge the tiny remaining gap between them, to see what other colors Jake's silent world held. The brush in his hand felt heavy, yet utterly insignificant in the face of this burgeoning, momentous shift. The brushes, still damp with the last vestiges of twilight orange, lay abandoned on the easel's tray. Milo, lost in the fading hues of his canvas, barely registered the faint creak of the balcony door until a subtle shift in the air stirred him. He turned, expecting to find Jake settling into his usual, silent vigil on the worn armchair. But tonight, Jake stood. He was directly in front of Milo, a mere arm's length away, bathed in the soft glow of the studio lamp. His hands, usually so relaxed or gesturing with quiet purpose, were clasped tightly before him, fingers interwoven and white at the knuckles. His gaze, typically fixed on the horizon or Milo's artwork, was cast downwards, tracing the intricate pattern of the rug beneath his worn boots. A nervous energy hummed around him, a stark contrast to his usual placid demeanor. It was the kind of tension that made the air feel thick, heavy with unspoken weight. Milo's heart, which had just begun to settle into a comfortable rhythm after the day's artistic exertions, began a frantic drumming. He felt a sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest, a premonition of something significant about to unfold. He wanted to speak, to break the sudden, unnerving silence that had descended, but no words came. His throat felt dry, his tongue a useless knot. He simply watched, captivated by the unfamiliar vulnerability radiating from Jake. Jake shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a small, almost imperceptible sway that spoke volumes of his inner turmoil. He took a breath, deep and visibly shaky, his chest expanding, then slowly deflating. It was a breath that seemed to gather all the courage he possessed, a preparation for something momentous. Milo held his own breath, a silent mirror to Jake's profound exhalation. Slowly, as if lifting a great weight, Jake raised his head. His eyes, usually a calm, steady blue, were now luminous, shimmering with an emotion Milo couldn't quite decipher, yet felt resonate deep within his own core. There was fear there, yes, but also a raw, undeniable sincerity that pierced through Milo's carefully constructed walls. And then, a sound. It was soft, barely a whisper, yet it vibrated through the quiet studio, shattering weeks of comfortable, eloquent silence. It was Jake's voice, a little wobbly, unpracticed, but undeniably real. "Milo," he began, his voice catching slightly. I know this is sudden. I know I haven't said much before, but..." He trailed off, his gaze dropping back to his hands, then quickly returning to Milo's eyes, as if seeking permission to continue. Milo merely blinked, still unable to articulate a response. Every fiber of his being was attuned to Jake, to the trembling energy that now filled the space between them. The air thrummed with a new kind of magic, electric and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Jake took another shuddering breath, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I keep coming back," he continued, his voice gaining a fragile strength. "Night after night, even when I know it makes no sense to you, even when I know I should just stay away." He paused, his eyes searching Milo's, pleading for understanding. Milo felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. He had wondered, of course. He had spun countless theories in his mind about Jake's inexplicable appearances, each one more convoluted than the last. But none of them had prepared him for the stark, simple truth that was about to be laid bare. Jake's voice, now a little clearer, though still laced with a profound vulnerability, finally delivered the words that had been building between them like an unspoken tide. "I keep coming back, Milo, because I love you." The confession hung in the air, a fragile, luminous thing. Milo's world, which had been slowly shifting on its axis since Jake's first appearance, tilted violently. His heart, already hammering, skipped a beat, then another, then began a wild, erratic dance. The brushes on the easel, the half-finished canvas, the very walls of his studio seemed to recede, leaving only Jake's shimmering eyes and those three utterly devastating words. The secret The true reason behind the silent visits, the shared moments, the growing intimacy was finally revealed. And in that revelation, Milo felt an entire universe open up before him.